Well, good morning. How are you today? Good morning online as well. So I had several people ask this morning if, last night the Chiefs game, negative like 27 degree wind chill. And I had several people ask me this morning, like, this is going to be the coldest sermon you've ever preached. And I thought about not wearing sleeves this morning, just kind of show you how tough I was. But no, actually during COVID, when we were doing two services, it was actually 31 degrees outside when we did one of our outdoor services. And I think there were like 8 people there. It was awesome. But hey, I'm so excited to be here this morning with you as we work through this series, Foxes in the Vineyard. So several years ago, I was in a lot better shape. And I was running a lot, and I was kind of trying to do some things to compete and race. And there was a 3-year period where I was doing the Fresh 15, and I kept progressing and getting faster. And I'm not fast. Like if you look and you see a real runner running, and they just kind of glide smoothly, like you'd look at me and be like, oh, pretty light on your feet for a fat boy. Like there's a difference between us. And so like for me, an 8-minute and 30-second mile is pretty quick. And so I had gotten a little bit quicker, and I got down around like 220, 221 for a 15K. And the next year I ran, and I had my best time ever, and I was like in the 119 range, and I'd run like an 830 something mile. And I kept working and getting faster, and I had kind of gotten down into like the 920-ish mile range. And I went to Joseph Dennis. Hey, is it okay if I tell this story? Great. Okay, I figured, because it makes him look amazing. But I went to Joseph. Beth, listen and just be impressed by your husband. I went to Joseph and I said, hey, I've been working really hard, and I want someone to pace me who's a friend. And I want to try to get down around 8-minute a mile pace for the 15K. Now, if you're thinking, okay, well, 8:20 to 8 minutes is not, just so you know, over the course of 9.3 miles, it's about 5 or 6 minutes faster. And so I went into Joseph and I said, hey, let's do this. And he goes, all right, this is going to be great. So we're going to start out a little bit faster than that pace. And then on the back side of the course where we have all the hills, we'll kind of slow down a little bit. And so we ran, and in the first mile, I ran the fastest mile of my life. 8 minutes and 2 seconds. In the second mile, I ran the now new fastest mile of my life at 7:50. Yeah. And we ran by Ron and Gwen Schultz's place, and I was doing this. Trying to breathe. And Joseph looks over at me. He goes, are you good? And I said, he said, we're kind of falling behind the rest of the pace group, and we need to pick up the pace. Are you good to go? And I said, and Joseph takes off, and he looks up about 100 yards later, and he's like, and Gary's still back here going, and I ran the fastest 5K of my life. I ran the fastest 6K of my life. 10K of my life. And then I ran the second fastest 15K. And Nathan, is Nathan here? There's Nathan. Hey. Nathan, no, it wasn't Nathan. It was Brian. Brian Richardson almost caught me. Because as the day went on, it got slower and slower and slower. And I found that, okay, I can run a 7-minute and 50-second mile. The problem is I couldn't sustain that pace. I couldn't keep going. Right, there's a lot that you can do. There's a lot that you're capable of. But the question is, are we capable of sustaining that over time? Because I think what that race showed is that time is our biggest limiting factor. It is the thing that you are fighting against, that you are racing against. And the truth of it is you are all really, really strong people who are capable of carrying far beyond anything that you could imagine. Like you're strong and you can do things that you never thought you could. You can carry things relationally and physically, spiritually, with your relationship with your spouse or with your kids. You're capable of carrying so much, and oftentimes far beyond anything we ever thought we could handle. But the question is, how long can you do that? See, our carrying capacity is far more limited by the clock than it is our strength. Because as I said, you can do a lot. But the question is, how long can you carry it? And the fox I want to talk about today is the busyness fox. And if you jumped in last week, if you missed last week, this series is based on this kind of proverb out of the Song of Solomon. And it says, "Catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that sneak in and ruin our vineyards." And so we're talking about some of the things that sneak in to our relationships and into our marriage that break down those relationships. What are the little foxes? So last week was the godless fox. This week is the busyness fox. And if we're honest, most of us pack a little too much into our life and into our world. And I think this might be one of the most deceptive foxes of all. Because it is a fox that can be completely consumed with doing so many good things that need to be done. But over time, takes its toll on our relationships. And I started to wonder, what if Satan's greatest tool is not seduction, but production? What if Satan loves it when we're busy? Because in our mind, in our world, in our culture, busy equals good. We wear it almost as a badge of honor. You see someone you haven't seen in a while. "Hey, how are you doing?" "Man, I'm doing great, just busy." "How are you doing?" "I'm doing pretty good, just busy." Right? How often is that our response in our world? And especially for those of you who are kind of in the middle, like we are, of raising kids. It's really easy to fill up your day and to have so many things packed in. But every time I say yes to something or someone, I say no to something or someone else. Something is always going to be left out and shortchanged. And far too often it is our relationships. Far too often it's our marriages that kind of get the short end of the stick. But these relationships are living organisms, and they must be fed to grow. So in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells stories, two in particular. And it's interesting, not just simply the story, but how the stories are layered together. And so many times we look at these stories individually and kind of don't worry about a context, but for some reason I think Luke was pretty purposeful in pairing these stories together. And my guess is you've heard a sermon on the first one, and I'm pretty sure you probably heard a sermon on the second one. And so I don't want to just really focus in on these stories as much as I want to focus in on how these stories work together to give you and I a really, really important message. And it's in Luke 10, if you want to turn there or if you want to pull it up on your device. But the first is the story of the Good Samaritan. And the Good Samaritan, my guess is, whether you've been in church your whole life or this is your first time to ever walk through the doors, you've at least heard reference to this story, this parable that Jesus tells. And there's an expert in the law who comes to Jesus and he asks him what the most important commandment is. And Jesus says, well, what do you think it is? And he says, well, I think it's love the Lord your God with all of your heart and soul and strength and mind. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, you are right. Go and live these two commands, these most important commands out. And then the text says he wanted to justify himself. He wanted to prove his righteousness. And so he asked Jesus, so tell me, who is my neighbor? And then Jesus tells a parable. He said there was a man that was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. This is a really common path. It was kind of rugged. It was known for kind of violence along the path and crime that happened there. And it was really these roads that were cut into the side of a cliff. It was treacherous terrain. He says there was a priest that was going on this road. There was a man who was going on this road. He was beaten and he was robbed and he was left half dead, waiting to die. And it says there was a priest that was on this road and he passed by on the other side. This is Jesus, I think, being humorous because on this road there was no other side. These were very, very narrow roads. It was almost that he stepped around so that he could not touch him. And then there was a Levite who was going along this road, and he too passed by on the other side. And then the story turns. Because my guess is for the hearers, they would have expected to hear a Pharisee or a teacher of the law or someone of righteous and noble character. But instead, they hear a Samaritan. You see, we label the story a good Samaritan, but in the Jewish culture, that is an oxymoron. There is no such thing. But this Samaritan, he stops and he sees the man and he begins to care for him and bandage his wound. He takes him into town to an inn and he pays for him. And he says, if there's any other cost, I'll be back tomorrow and I'll pay for it. And then Jesus asks this question. He says, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert of the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, go and do likewise. It was the one who had mercy whose life we should mirror, whose life we should look like. And Jesus says to him, go and do likewise. And the story really comes out, go and do. Right? That's the big message, go and do. But then he tells another story that follows it. And it has a really different feel. Jesus has gone into the home of Martha. And Martha is running around because Jesus has come and she's making preparations. She's cleaning, fixing food, and all those things I'm guessing that you would be doing to prepare for Jesus to come into your house. And she's focused so much on everything that has to be done. But her sister Mary is not helping. She's sitting. She's sitting at the feet of Jesus, listening to Him. And Martha comes in, I guess, enraged. And I get this. I have kids. We say, hey, go wash the dishes. There's always one that comes in, Dad, tell to help me. Martha comes in and says to Jesus, don't you care that I'm in here working and preparing, and my sister is sitting here doing nothing? Right? We relate. But then Jesus says, Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. And Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. You see, if you walk away from this story, the message is not go and do, it's come and sit. And I think what Luke would want us to know, what Jesus probably as well would want us to know, is that the going and doing is really important. But there has to be a balance with come and sit. Yes, go and do, but also come and sit at my feet and learn and grow. Because if this relationship with you and Christ is going to grow, it has to have time, and it has to have focus, and it has to have intentionality. It's a necessity for your relationship with Christ. But I think one of the things I've kind of learned in ministry is there is a direct correlation between my productivity and my presence. You see, it's possible to be in a place and to be doing so many things and working so hard at things that are important and things that are good that I miss the people around me. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone, and maybe here at church, maybe somewhere else, and they're sitting there talking to you, and you're not listening to a word they're saying? And you're looking around, you're seeing other people come in, and you're thinking about all the things you have to do when you leave this place, and you're there. But you're not there. Anyone else ever been there? Where you're so focused on the things that you need to do. You see, and this is not it's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just a thing. Like our life gets consumed with stuff. And that relationship with Christ carries over to every other relationship that we have. Right? It carries over to everything. And your ability to carry more and more than what you're actually capable of is limited by the clock. Right? You get 24 hours every day, 7 days a week. And that's it. You don't get more. You don't figure out how to cheat the system. And the more you try to, the more you and your relationships will crash and burn. And we say as a society, well, we have our priorities. But sometimes I wonder if we actually have priorities or we just have a ton of stuff that we've got to do. So I want to invite Cammie back up. She's going to help me again. Everyone asked last week, well, did she actually know that she was going to help you? She did. I promise. I asked permission before. So we have this relationship. Brandon, can I have you help us? Just right there. Yeah. We have this relationship, and this relationship is separated by sin. Nope. There we go. There it is. Right? This relationship, what continually creeps into the picture is sin. And our focus, if it is not on Christ, and Christ helping to transform this relationship with Him, that it's not going to transform this relationship with her. And so what you need to commit to, especially for those of you who are married, for those of you who are engaged, is not focused on making this better. It's focused first on following Him and walking closer to Him. And what you notice is as you walk closer and closer to Him as a couple together, you get closer and closer together as well. Okay? You want to fix your marriage that's broken? You want to fix that relationship that's struggling? It's not focused here because there's something that's going to continually come between us. It's focused here. And as you walk closer to Him, focusing on this relationship becomes so much easier. Because my prayer is, God, help me to love this person that I committed my life to the way that you have loved me. Help me to love her as you have loved your bride. Unconditionally committed to her. Now, as beautiful as that looks, what happens so often is we start on this journey together and everything is great. Can I borrow you and you? My guess is you got a lot of stuff. And she's got a lot of stuff. And we'll try to continue to walk closer and closer to Christ. But our attention so easily starts to drift from Him to this. And as Christ drifts further and further, this becomes more and more important. And the gap between us grows greater and greater. Have you ever heard someone say, well, we just kind of woke up one morning and realized we had drifted apart? And the only way to fix this, the only way to make this relationship as it should be, is to focus back on following Christ. You're going to have your stuff, I promise you. You're going to have stuff that you've got to do. But it can't be the focus. Thank y'all so much. Thank you. It cannot be the focus. See, because every time I say yes to something or someone, I say no to something else. And I wonder if Satan's greatest tool, if his greatest tool is not seduction, but production. All this stuff that I've got to do. all this stuff that becomes a priority. And I think all of us have this fear of failing. But maybe our greatest fear should be succeeding at the things that don't really matter. Because at the end of the day, if my relationship with Christ is failing, and my relationship with my spouse is failing, I might look really, really successful. But am I succeeding at the things that at the end of the day don't matter? You see, I think what happens in our marriages, in our relationships, is that time goes by and they drift further and further apart. Most of you know that Tesla has invented basically a self-driving car. And if you Google these self-driving cars, you'll find out that there have been quite a few accidents on the road. And Tesla says on their screen, it says, you must keep your hands on the wheel. Even in auto drive, you must pay attention. But there's a story in California of a guy who was driving down the highway going around 65, 70 miles an hour, not paying attention. When his auto-driving Tesla encountered a covered roadway and about 4 inches of water completely submerged for about 150, 200 yards. And the car didn't have the technology to expect the hazard. It didn't know there was a problem coming, and it didn't make the adjustments necessary. And the car hit this water, and it hydroplaned off the road, down this little ditch embankment, and into a little pond where it was submerged. It crashed and burned and was stuck in this pond. There's a picture there. There we go. And the problem was it was left alone. And the assumption was, well, it'll be fine. But I think for you and I, one of the biggest byproducts of busyness is neglect. We stop focusing on what matters most. And we assume that everything will be fine. So this is going to be a little race. And you kind of ask, okay, so which one is going to win? Which one is going to last the longest? Which one is going to continue going? See, this top will go for a really, really long time. It's pretty impressive. But eventually, that top is going to lose. It's going to stop spinning before that hourglass runs out. It's going to crash and burn. It's a pretty impressive top, isn't it? Eventually it stops. And the only way to keep it going, as long as that sand is going to last, is to give it attention along the way. And along the way, as it struggles, as it goes through difficulty, to restart. I think so often we think we've said, I do. And our life gets busy and it gets hectic. And this relationship that we talked about gets put on autopilot. And we just assume that it's going to be okay. But that busyness consumes. And that sin separates. And it breaks down the most important relationship that we have. So real quick, how do we move forward? Right? One, I think you take inventory. Take inventory of what is going on in your life in this season, right? And in these busy seasons that we're much more intentional. We have 4 kids. We know that there are seasons in our life, specifically for us, the end of February through May is really, really, really busy. End of August through November is really, really, really busy. And then we have these gaps where we know we've got to slow down. But during that busy season, we have to be really intentional about connecting to one another. For Cammie and I, what we do every Thursday, we have lunch together. It's on my calendar. It's scheduled. No one else gets that time. Maybe over the course of the year, we might move it once or twice. It's just set in stone. Because we're going to be really intentional about being together. Now, we're going to have other times, but there's going to be that's set in stone. 2, have some alerts in your life. Some things that you look at, some things that you see. Man, are we going to church together as a family? Are we connecting with Christ together? Because this is really, really important. You've got to have these things that kind of sound alert for you. And hey, there's a problem. We need to connect better. Number 3, pursue your spouse. Right? Before we got married, when you were dating, you remember they had these things called flowers? And you bought them all the time, and you would surprise her, you would do things for him, and then you get married. One of the most impressive people in this church is Don Faubus. I don't know if you noticed this. Just watch Don. When Don and Pam leave this place, anytime they're here, Don goes and opens the door for Pam to the car and closes it. Exactly. That a boy. And I'll just be honest. I don't do that for my wife. And I should. But we're busy. We got things to do. We got places to go. Kids to feed. Who are hungry. Dad, we're hungry. Pursue your spouse. No matter how old, no matter how long you've been married, pursue your spouse. Number 4, pray together. Pray together. As a couple, pray together. We'll talk about this, Fox, a few weeks from now in this series. And you can think, okay, well, you got it all together. You know, you got it right, okay? I don't. I mess it up. You mess it up. That's the point. Back when I was in youth ministry, there was a summer where we didn't have a preacher at West Hill. And as a great staff member, I volunteered to fill in and preach. The problem was it was the middle of the summer. And I was gone almost every week or every other week with kids' trips and stuff. And I would come home and I would spend the rest of the time preparing, and I would preach Sunday. And there was one Sunday, it was June, I preached all 5 Sundays. And Cammie came in, and she looked at me and she said, "Hey, I love you, but if you preach next week, I'm going to go spend the rest of the summer with my parents in Oklahoma with our kids." Now, I was doing some really, really good things. I mean, if anyone can rationalize, I was preaching. But the problem was, I was loving the church and I was serving my wife. And what Christ has called me to is to love my wife and serve the church. See, the church is His bride. And He has loved His bride more than anyone else could possibly love this bride. So much so that He laid down His life. And He's told us, I want your relationship with your spouse to mirror that. So last week, we'll end with this. Last week I gave you commitment number 1, right? I promise to surrender daily to Christ, being transformed into the image of Christ. And if you will commit to do that, I promise you, if you will do that and focus on begging and pleading with Christ to help you love your wife, to love your husband more and more and more, I promise you, your relationship will grow closer. Okay? So when we talk about the busyness fox, this is really, really important. Make sure you get this. This is commitment number 2. I promise to surrender daily to Christ, being transformed into the image of Christ. See, the commitment doesn't change. If you will focus on Jesus, everything else will start to come into focus, including this relationship that's so important. Father, we thank you so much for this time. God, we're grateful to be together. We're thankful for the way that you love us unconditionally. Father, for the way that you have loved your bride. Father, may we love our spouses well. May we serve them. May we share with them. May we give to them. May we lay our lives down for them as you have done for yours. Father, help us as we follow Jesus to submit to Him, becoming more and more like Christ every day. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, we're going to have our shepherds and their spouse